Greetings, family. Greetings. This is the very first live video that we are doing here, Alchemy Masonic Lodge number 19, here in Greenville, South Carolina. And I greet you in the name of our wonderful Creator, who there's no description or no name that could describe our Creator. So we pay homage to who those of us who are Masons we call the Grand Architect of the universe, to our Supreme Grand Master, the most worshipful Maruka Grand Masonic Lodge, North America, Ancient Rite of Original Masons, to all of you who have been entered, passed, and raised to that sublime degree, I greet you in the greeting words of peace. Peace be unto you. And so I'm coming today as the worshipful master of Alchemy Masonic Lodge number 19, your brother, your friend, just for a little talk today in dealing with where were you first prepared. And this talk, we're going to cover a few things, at least four, with the permission of the Creator. First, the history, a little bit of the history of Masonry, the true history of Masonry. We're going to talk a little bit about the Blue House. We're going to talk about denominations of Masonry, okay, and why. Why do they exist? And we're also going to talk about this wonderful word that, and I say wonderful word just because it does bring wonder into the imagination, because we hear it a lot. A lot of our brothers, unfortunately, like to throw this word around, and that word is called clandestine. Clandestine, and that is the last thing that we will deal with. And the question for that word is, what is it really? What is it really? So we're going to discuss those four things again by the permission of our Creator. Again, I greet you in the greeting words of peace. I appreciate each and every single one of you, those who have not only traveled, but continue to travel and continue to spread that wonderful motto of love, brotherly love, relief, and truth, as we call it, in between and around those of us who are truly seeking knowledge of self. And so I'm going to talk about Masonry as we have been given it. One of the things that we have to understand, family, is that the word Masonry itself is the word of an organization. It's the word of an organization. It is not. It does not describe the true origin of what you see individuals being a part of and what you're part of, because I'm speaking right now to our Masonic brethren and also our wonderful, wonderful sisters who are co-regents with us, our Eastern Stars, Order of the Eastern Stars. And so Masonry, as it has been given to us, is not the true representation, okay, of what we actually call ourselves or our so-called organization. And it's an actual organism. It's a living thing. Organizations are incorporated. Organizations can die. Organizations are led by man. Okay. But when you have an organism, which is a living thing, then you're dealing with more, much more than just something that lives because someone went through the effort of filing it with a state. Okay, let's start getting some things clear. And so it is not the true representation of what our Kemetic ancestors studied and lived. Okay, the miseducation of the craft, of what we call the craft, has taught us that it began really in the 1730s. Okay, that's what we have been told, using the representation that many of us move in. Okay, and that it was actually founded by a man named Benjamin Franklin. Okay, uh, now the British would argue that it actually began in 1717, which is their argument. It's not ours. Okay, it's not. It's not our argument. Okay, the argument itself is between them, because when we start talking about the British, we start talking about years like 1717. When we begin talking about 1730 and all of that, we know that we're talking about the European. We're not discussing us or our origin, or the origin of what we call Masonry. We're going to talk about the word Egypt, and we're going to begin, like I said, to deal briefly with some of the history so that we can have a brief synopsis of what's been really taking place in what we call this wonderful craft. And so the word Egypt is a Greek word that was used for Kemet, okay, which is the original name given for the land, okay, which means black land. All right, which was derived from Kim, okay, Khem. It is spelled sometimes, and then also it is spelled Kem, but we know that vowels were not used. So most of the time you will see Khm, okay, for Kemet, or you'll see Kmt. All right. You have to understand too that vowels are interchangeable. I'm not going to give you a lesson in how that works, but I just want you to understand that we did not describe nor inscribe things with vowels. Okay. So it means black land, derived from Kim, which means black, and this actually comes from the fertile black soils deposited by the Nile floods. And so when you begin to understand what it means and why, then you begin to understand where these words actually come from. Okay, Egypt is not the original name, is not the ancient name. The ancient name is Kemet or Misr, 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 which gets into Misraim. All right, and we'll discuss that on another time. But the Osirika, or the Asaru rite, which you heard me mention in my introduction. The Asaru rite is the original rite of the craft, what we call the craft or masonry, what's called masonry today. And Asaru, or as the Greeks plagiarized it, which was Osiris, represents the life and rebirth, that comes as a natural revolution of the process of death. Okay, and so what we're talking about life, we're talking about death, and there are rituals within what we call masonry today that actually go through the process of demonstrating life and death. And we're really speaking about life and death within you. It's very important for us to understand these things as we begin to matriculate through what we call the degrees or the steps of life. Okay. And so, again, it's the natural revolution of the process of death. Now, and I say he very loosely because we are not dealing with gods as we were taught. We were told that we had Egyptian gods. Okay, and that's not true. They were called Meduneta, and Meduneta stands for the natural processes that we're talking about. Stands for nature. Okay, so these principles, Saru or Asa, was a principle and still is a principle within the natural processes of life, and within the natural processes of you and I within. And so Asar is the Lord, okay, of life, who yielded the vegetation and the fertilization of the floods of the Nile River, which we mentioned a little earlier. And so that's what Asar represents, Lord of life and also Lord of death. Doesn't represent what we have been taught is positive or negative. In other words, um, good or bad. It represents the positive and negative forces. It represents the yin and the yang. It represents the proton and the electron. Okay, the opposites. All right. And so when you understand what that means, now you begin to understand what it means when we're talking about true life and death, not with what you see with your eyes. And so it's very important for us to understand the history and the true right where this comes from. Did not start in the 1700s. We're talking about well over, and I could go beyond, but I would just use well over 40,000 years ago, where this concept, which was stolen, which was taken, and we'll deal with that later on in our steps, which was actually taken from us and from our land and used to create an organization in the 1700s, which you know today as Masonry. So when you understand the origins of where these sciences came from, the liberal arts, the orders of architecture, which also those five um, were instituted or inserted by the Greeks and the Romans, and then the three steps, the first three steps, which we call youth, manhood, and old age. When you understand where these things come from, then you can really truly be able to understand where this thing that we call masonry, the craft, actually comes from. It did start in Kemet. Kemet was the birthplace of the revealing of it, but Kemet was not the true origin. The true origin comes from the way that we lived as a people. It's not something that we just learned. It's not an organization that we got into. We actually live these things each and every single day. And so the representation of what you call masonry are stolen sciences. They're stolen sciences from our land, stolen sciences from our minds, our ancestors' minds, stolen sciences that were taken and made into an organization. And so understanding that the European was not the founder of the sciences themselves. However, the European is the founder of what you see as masonry here in America, not the sciences, but the incorporation. I'll say that again, the incorporation of what you see as an organization that you call masonry today. So understanding those truths, those actual facts, and understanding that, now we can begin, hopefully, to understand where this thing started. This was a way of life for us each and every single day. This was a way of life for us studying the cosmos. It was a way of life for us to teach truly the inner workings of self. It was a way of life for us to understand metaphysics, what we call metaphysics today, which is really just alchemy, inner alchemy, turning lead into gold. It was a way of life for us to understand how nature worked and how nature directly connects with the inner workings of man and woman. It was a way of life for us to be able to understand that death is not the end, but understanding what it really means. So the life of our ancestors were entrenched and rooted in something that took place single day, every single day. And so these things were taken. Now, speaking of Asar, I'll give you a little bit more about Asar. There's a story that is told about Asar, um, that Asar was not only a great king, but Asar, being the one who brings life, was one who traveled not only through the portions of Kemet, but all over to teach these sciences, to teach agriculture, to teach all of the wonderful things that we enjoy today. This is the story. okay, which is steeped in allegory and understanding the definition that was given of your profession, brothers and sisters, that it is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. So here is that story, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. So Asa was one who traveled and began to spread these things and to bring not only kingdoms together, but lands together in the hopes that we would be able to live and continue to build and to grow using and giving these sciences and teaching civilization to all people, and civilization not as we know it today, but civilization when it comes to raising up man and his family so that he could continue to raise up those communities. And so he had a brother. He had a brother, and his brother's name was Set, or what we call Seti. And his brother was very angry, jealous, and envious of what it is that he was doing, and did not feel like he should be recognized as the one, or revered as one who would bring in these teaching. And so he would follow his brother in everything that Asa was raising up, which was good. Seti would come behind him and tear it down. It is said that he used words like, who was he to teach you? Who was Asa and to teach you? And why would you even listen to him? And so as Asa traveled, Seti would continue to follow him. As he built up, Seti would tear down. And finally, Seti, or Set, caught up with him, and the story goes that he killed him. He cut him up into 14 pieces and spread it all over the land. All right, and uh, Asa had a co-regent who was Aset. See, back then, family, there was no patriarchal or matriarchal system. If you had to choose one, it would have been more matriarchal. However, we considered our feminine counterparts, our sisters, our mothers, our daughters, as co-regents with us. Okay, they were co administrators with us, beside us, because we understood and understand today, many of us, who the woman really is. But to get back to the story, she could not find him. She searched for him all over, and she began to find all of the pieces of him, except for one piece, which was the phallus, or what we call the male member. And then the story goes on to describe what was done at that point. And so within that story, it actually describes uh, the obstacle, the challenges that we have with obstructions that come to us as we move forward in spreading the that mortar, that wonderful mortar of brotherly love, relief, and truth, where there's always obstructions that you will encounter to try to stop or to thwart or to overturn anything positive that you have done. And so the stories that you hear later on in what you call masonry are not the original stories. The original story comes from Asa, Aset, Heru, and also Set. And so I would definitely encourage you to study the true story of Asa, Aset, Heru, and Set, and so that you can understand where a lot of the so-called ancient stories actually come from. It's very important for us, those of us who call ourselves Masons, especially those that are of original descent, which we call Black men, or of African descent, and Black women, or African women of descent. Um, of Black descent, or of African women of African descent, then we need to understand these stories, and we need to understand that the rulership and the plagiarism, and then the feeding back to you stories that are did were not of you and still are not of you, is definitely a disservice to our mental, physical, and spiritual beings. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, as we move on, talk a little bit about the Blue House as well, and in dealing with some of these stories and why things are the way that they are. It was never the intent in dealing with Asar, Aset, Heru, Set, and all of the stories of the Medunetta. It was never the intention of our ancestors to depict these principles as individuals. They understood that they were not individuals. They understood and never considered them as gods. They understood them as mystical principles, again, of the movements and the processes of nature within and without them. Okay, there's only recently, within the past 500 to 600 years, that we have come into a place where we allow ourselves to take on things like belief in a god or gods that literally roam through the cosmos. Okay, we knew better. We knew that they were principles, and we dealt with them as such, and we taught stories in order for our children and our children's children to understand the movements, the revolution, the evolution, and the processes of nature. And so the Blue House or the Blue Lodge is a representation of that. Okay, it houses the first 3 degrees, the first, the second, and the third degree. And through those degrees, it teaches those processes that we are talking about. It teaches them in a way where they are veiled. However, as you climb, then you will learn the those processes. If you study and if you show yourself that you are approved, then you definitely do become a workman at that time, being able to rightly divide the word of truth. And the word is actually the verb action. So the action of truth, because truth is action. Truth is action because you must be a workman to prove it. The truth or actual fact is actually recognized through your work and through your actions. Okay, so the first 3 degrees are taught in Masonry, in the Blue House, and there's a story that's given that I will not get into today, but there's a story that was given to us that was literally created from the European of one who fell upon a horrible tragedy. This is something that you actually learn when you are matriculating through the third degree or the Master Mason's degree of someone who did not actually exist. All right, this individual who fell upon a serious tragedy, however, was raised, okay, again, and this individual who did not exist. His name was Hiram. Okay. And Hiram, I said that he did the same thing. And I want you to see the parallel in the story. There are some parallels, and there are some things that were taken out and changed. But Hiram did the same thing. His job as a Grand Master was to teach, to go throughout the land to teach and to teach the mysteries. And there were those who were jealous, okay, of him and demanded the secrets from him. Now, the European is actually talking about himself, because when you understand what Hiram actually represents within you, then you'll understand why there were those who needed to come. It wasn't just one individual. Like in the story of Asa, it was his brother. Okay, understand. It was his brother that came for him. But then the story that the Europeans gave us within what we call Masonry today, there were several individuals that were jealous and envious, okay, which were represented by just three, okay, who came and who caused several obstructions and eventually death to come to this so-called Grand Master. And so I do not make fun of the story itself because I understand. the processes of it. We're talking about the origins, okay, where you first prepared. And so it's very important for us to understand as Masons or as alchemists, which is what we really are, alchemists, alchem, al meaning God, and chem meaning black or black land. Okay, alchemist. We have within us the system of the black land to God or the black God within us. Okay, so, and we'll get into that at another time. However, it is very important for us to understand those things, even when we look at the stories that we are given and what we are called, and the process and what we call the blue house. And so when you understand those things as a leader, if you find yourself in the East, then you can teach properly what these things really mean and who they really represent, which is each and every single Mason, each and every single Eastern Star. Okay, and understanding as well, when dealing with the Eastern Star or the woman, you are not dealing with one who is subjugated by the Mason, subjugated by what we call the Grand Lodge, subjugated by the individuals that the men, to be real, that are so-called in charge of Masonry, or the brothers as we call it, but that the woman actually is again a co-regent. So there should be no woman who needs to ask permission of any Mason, Master Mason, any worthy patron or no one else, any grand master, that the woman or the Eastern Star or the worthy matron or the grand worthy matron that has to ask permission and stand in the shadows of man or mason. I had to make that clear. She is a co-regent. She is one that stands by your side, and without her, there's nothing that we can accomplish, nothing that will come forward out of us, nothing that will be birthed or manifested in our lives without her, especially if we subjugate her. So that's something that needs to be cleared up. And so the blue house is where these first three processes are given. And to be honest with you, they are the only processes that matter. All of the processes of the Medunetta are actually given in the blue house. All of the principles are actually given. You don't know it because the way that it's given to you is veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, but you're actually given all of the processes within yourself and the principles that, again, we know as the Medunetta through all 3 degrees of Masonry. And that's why it takes study, and that's why it takes the patience of the worshipful master and the leaders of the lodge to be able to take time with those who are entered, to be able to take time for those who are past, and to take time with those who are newly raised, to be able to teach, as the worshipful master's job is to give, set the craft to work and to give proper instruction. There should never be a Mason who was raised in one night. A man coming in who has never been in the lodge, there is no such thing as a man coming in to be entered and he's given all 3 degrees in one night. What is that? And where did it come from? It didn't come from our ancient ancestors because we didn't even have these processes as you see them today in place. But it definitely would not have been an individual who was being newly introduced to the mysteries when he or she became of age of reasoning, to be given everything in one day. And those of us who do it, you're doing a disservice to the true craft, to the original alchemy that we operate in, and you're doing a disservice to yourself, worshipful master, senior and junior wardens, and you're doing a disservice to that brother or even to that sister, because I do understand that that's done as well many times within the Order of the Eastern Star. There's no such thing. There's no way that you can ever exhaust in your lifetime, however long you live, the mysteries and the sciences of alchemy, of the craft, or of masonry. So, how in the world do you think that you can be given something in one night? You are only a Mason or an Eastern Star on paper when this is done. Okay, and I have to say these things because I know that there are many that this has been done to. You have been done a disservice. It does no good. But listen, the signs that you're given, the tokens and the passwords and all of that mean nothing if you don't understand how they directly connect you with the universe itself. And that these things that are given to you are designed to make certain things happen in within you and within your atmosphere and for the individual, the brother or the sister that you come in contact with. And so when you understand these things, then you understand that they're not to be taken lightly, and that those who are more interested in quantity, the amount of individuals that come into a blue house or an Eastern Star chapter, for those who are more interested in quantity versus quality, you do not deserve to be where you are. Okay, I'll move on. Denominations in Masonry. Uh, Many will say, well, what do you mean, worshipful master, denominations in Masonry? There have become denominations in Masonry just like there are denominations in religion. And when it comes to the original man and the original woman, we then delve into the history of a man that we call Prince Hall, um, who was a former slave, and many of you know the history of him. But for those that don't know, to give you a short version, I want you to do your own due diligence and study the history. But for those of us who are original men and original women who have come through the matriculation process or the journey or your travels in Masonry, many understand that that was the only place for individuals to go here in America that look like you and I to be able to come into what we call Masonry today. But what needs to be understood is that out of that came many different jurisdictions that we call that I use the word denomination, but jurisdictions will respond out of that because there were certain things that were seen on individuals who had risen into certain areas of masonry, which we call degrees, decided that they would make a change and begin new jurisdictions and what have you. Does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense because many who have done that have been ridiculed by many individuals in Prince Hall Masonry, being called different names, which is our fourth point. But saying that they are not real if they did not come through there. But let's move back to what was stolen, and here's what needs to be understood: if the European themselves stole, which they did, pillaged and raped, and stole these mysteries for themselves to create an organization that we call Masonry today, understanding that it comes from Kemet, it comes from the original land of our ancestors and the original mind of our ancestors. This being done, then you should be able to understand that those who are practicing what they call Masons as Europeans are not practicing the true mysteries of what we call the craft, or true name being alchemy. So if you are operating under a charter or banner coming from England, which there are those that look like you and I that do, which again makes no sense whatsoever. But when we're ignorant to really what's going on and we're more interested in fraternity, okay, then the actual truth or actual facts that are out here for us, then we can understand why this was done. But if you are one who is held under the banner and under the thumb of a charter given to you from England, then you actually are still operating under what we would call a form of slavery. Okay. As an original man and original woman, we do not, and we will not, those of us who are conscious, be under a banner where, again, the European has the power to remove power from us operating in an organism that was created by us. And so this takes me into uh, the the denominations, and how the splits came, when many individuals found the history and really began to study and to dig in, and they said, I'm not going to be a part of this portion of it that was created by our brother, Prince Hall. And this is not to say anything negative about my brothers or sisters that belong to this jurisdiction. There are many that I know that are wonderful brothers and wonderful sisters, but many do not know this true history. And those that do, many of them feel like they've been a part of it for so long. Why change? And that's fine. However, we should take the information that is being given, do our due diligence and study, and understand that it is our duty to teach truth and to live truth and to operate under the banner of the actual facts of who we really are and how we should be operating and what we should be truly teaching. It's very important, very important. And so many of the denominations or the factions of Masonry, or what we would call, let's just call it what we call it, Black Masons, derive from individuals being disgruntled in the beginning stages, and which we'll say within the 50s, maybe 60s, and what have you. Um, and don't quote me on that, but it's around that time where places, jurisdictions, Hiram Grant and others, Zerebellum, they begin to sprout out. Okay. And the reason being, again, is because of dissatisfaction. However, many of them found themselves operating in the same way of the individuals that they departed from. So we have to think about these things and to get ourselves right. What happened? Why do we do the things that we do? We say what we don't want to be a part of it, but we fall right back into the same origins of the organization of Masonry versus the organism of true Masonry, or again, the true word being alchemy. Okay, so the last thing we are going to deal with today is that word, that nasty word. I said it's a wonderful word because it does cause wonder. But this word that we call clandestine. Now, what is it really? The word clandestine deals with anyone, with anything that has done what we call go through the back door to gain something and to take it without properly taking the steps for it to be given to you. And so I'm going to encourage my brothers and sisters who are in the different factions, who are Black Masons, as we call it. If you're original man and original woman and you are a part of a jurisdiction and you are throwing around this word haphazardly, I would encourage you to stop. Because again, if your charter comes from the European, if you are governed by those that are in England or by any other European faction, and you know that they're the ones that actually stole, which they did, all of the sciences, the mysticism, and the life that we actually lived every single day and put it into a small box called an organization. You know that this was done in several instances, yet you find yourself under the charter, okay, of these individuals who did steal, who did go through the back door to get what they have, who did not come rightfully to those of us who had the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, but stole bits and pieces of it to create something else, they are clandestine. And if you fall under the thumb or under the auspices of these individuals, guess what? So are you. So please stop throwing that word around, because when you throw it around, it is a sign of ignorance, especially if you are one that is in a jurisdiction that is governed by the European. Period. We have to be careful on what we do in being parrots of what someone else says or what they tell you versus doing your due diligence and study the showing and showing yourself approved. So, brothers and sisters, I encourage you to study. I encourage you to embrace the other brothers and sisters who you know have gone through what they needed to go through to get where they are, dealing with that sublime degree and also dealing with those five sisters that we love so much within the order of the Eastern Stars, those five principles that they go through. You know that they have gone through those steps. You know, there's much more that we need to know, much more that we need to study. But if you know that they've gone through that, why call them anything but your brother or your sister? Why call them anything but a friend? Why call them anything but one who has traveled with you in brotherly love, relief, and truth? Why? Why call them anything but family? This is not about competition. It shouldn't be about competition. It shouldn't be about who's better. It shouldn't be about whatever history that you were taught and you're going to try to use it, or having a stance that you've been around longer, so that makes us better. And if you're not a part of us, then you're wrong. No, that's not how it works, because we were all created truly in the image and in the likeness of the Creator. That's where that question comes in, and I won't go too far into it, but it asks a question. Are you worthy and well qualified? Are you duly and truly prepared? And the answer is always given in the affirmative, yes. And this is before you are actually entered into the lodge. How is that even possible? Are you worthy and well qualified? You haven't yet stepped inside yet. Are you duly and truly prepared? You haven't yet stepped inside of the lodge yet. This is your first step. You're being entered into this world. And before you cross the threshold of the door, the answer is given in the affirmative. Yes, he is. That's because you are created in the image and in the likeness of the Creator. And even though you don't know it, you are worthy and you are well qualified as an original man and original woman, because you are the maker, the owner, the cream of the planet Earth, God of the universe itself. And when you understand that, there's a chair that sits on the outside of the door. And on the back of this chair, it says, Know thyself. It's very, very important that you keep this in mind. My brother, my original sister, keep it in mind that knowing yourself is the greatest thing that you could do for self, because it will teach you and open up a world to you that moves beyond any organization out here. You be understanding that you are the organism, you are the lodge, you are the chapter itself, and that everything moves according to your will and pleasure. So I hope and pray that as the Creator has used me today just to give you a few things, that there was something in whatever 4 points that was given, something that sparked something in you to go forward and to study. I encourage you that everything that I talked about today, that you go and you study it on your own. I will never tell you just to believe me. No, I want you to find it on your own so that you can develop a proper, healthy respect for what you are a part of. Family, again, my name is Right Worshipful Dr. D.A. Dennis Sr. I am the Worshipful Master of Alchemy, Masonic Lodge number 19, under the auspices of Most Worshipful Maruka Grand Masonic Lodge of North America, Ancient Rite of Original Masons. I leave you as I greeted you in the greeting words of peace and prosperity. Of peace be unto you, your families, your brothers, your sisters, most importantly, our original family. Love your family. Peace.